Hey, Confirmation families, Eric Duffy here at the Church of the Epiphany. I am just giving you your Confirmation Session 7 recap and parent note. If you were not able to make it to Confirmation Session 7, you missed a lot of information. Confirmation Session 7 was our sponsor night, and so we had tons of sponsors there. Room was packed, and we learned a lot about what it means to be a sponsor, and we also talked a lot about the source and summit of our faith, right, which is the Mass. So it was a great night. It was really fun, and we learned a lot of really awesome stuff. So first, I'm just going to touch on the parent note to begin with, and that's just this. The parent note is just a note on times of grief and trouble. Some of you may or may not know, but my wife and I recently lost our stillborn child, Colby Solanas. Passed away before he was born, when my wife was at full term. So we're just going through a lot of grief and struggle right now. And the one thing that I've noticed and I've found is that we as a parish have the ability to be the body of Christ for one another. We have a profound responsibility to love one another and to also be there for them during times of trouble. Just as a husband and wife, right, are promised to be there for each other during sickness and in health, right? So too, as a church, as the body of Christ, right, we're called to be there for our beloved, right, our family. So for those of you who came to the funeral or who are praying for us, thank you so much. We really appreciate that. I am not entirely sure at this point when I'll be back at confirmation, but I will be back as soon as I feel I'm able to give 100% to the program. As you guys know, and I've said 100 times too, actually, we never want to do anything halfway, right? So we want to be in confirmation and we want to be fully engaged, and right now I'm just not able to do that. So I'm going to be doing some stuff behind the scenes, but please pray for us. Know of my prayers for you and for this program, and I'll be back as soon as I can. So on to Confirmation Session 7. Confirmation Session 7, as I said, was a sponsor night, and we began Confirmation Session 7 talking about the source and summit of the faith, which is the Mass, right? The Holy Mass. Confirmation Session 7 was I think maybe for some a challenging session, and for others maybe a reaffirming, or maybe for others just a normal time. We had a great presenter, Margaret Kilby, who's a dear friend of mine who also helps with our youth program, and she shared about the power of the Mass and the importance of attending Mass. One thing that she didn't note, that she had intended to but meant to, is simply this: that the reality of what an actual mortal sin is, right? She talked about how missing Mass is actually a mortal sin, and mortal sins, when you die in a state of mortal sin, the result is that you're not unified to God's grace. Therefore, you can't receive His mercy, and ultimately you're condemned to hell because of your own choice, right? And I think that answer can be very daunting and maybe surprising to some people, though it shouldn't be, because this is what the Catholic Church has taught for thousands of years, right? So we believe this, right? We believe that the Mass is so important. It's our spiritual food. Without it, we can't be tied to God's grace, because that is what Christ left here on earth for us, right? To be able to receive Him. But here's the thing, right? For something to be a mortal sin, you need 3 different conditions to be there. First, the first condition is that you have to know that it is in fact a mortal sin. So if you don't know that something is a mortal sin, then it's not mortal sin, because you can't do a sin in ignorance, okay? The second one is that you have to not only know that it's a sin, but you have to choose to do it anyways, right? You have to choose to do it anyway. So you know that it's a sin, and you have to choose to do it anyways, right? So you have that knowledge. Okay, I know it's a sin, and I'm going to do it anyhow. Okay, and the third condition really is that you can't do it by accident, right? So if circumstances beyond your control, step in and you get in a car accident, you can't make it to Mass, right? Like, that's beyond your control. Like, it's not a mortal sin because you had every intention of going to Mass. You just have a circumstance that happened. Now, that's kind of where the moral gray area can come in, because some people are like, well, I had plans, right, to go see family or what have you. And that's where conscience plays in, right? If you have your mother or your grandmother, right, who's on their deathbed, and you want to go visit them, and this is the only time you can do it, it's Sunday, she's gonna die, you have to be there. Absolutely, that's beyond your control. That's not like, for say that you have a plan to go have a picnic in a park with a loved one. That's a really great thing, but it's not more important than Mass, right? It's not something that you can do. So those are kind of some of the stipulations with that, and that's important because I think some people might have heard our presentation last session, and we're like, oh my gosh, I'm going to hell, right? Because I missed Mass today, or we occasionally don't go, and while if you did know that you were supposed to go, and you did know that it was a mortal sin, and you did intend to do it anyways, then yeah, you're in a state of mortal sin and you should absolutely go to confession. But if you didn't know, and last session was the first time that you had ever heard that, well, those previous times aren't really mortal sin because you didn't know, right? But now you do. So now you have to go. And that was kind of the catch there. So I just wanted to make that clear for you guys. So anyways, we had sponsors come in, we met sponsors and we talked to them, and I handed out this booklet called Threshold. It's part of this program that I'm designing here called Fire Inside, which is our confirmation program, and it's a guide for sponsors. So let's walk through it. So the first page here, it says, so you're a sponsor. Don't panic. You have the opportunity and the privilege to mentor a young person in faith. You are chosen for this role because God believes you have what it takes. So sponsors need to remember, like, this role that they have, it's not a role that is to be taken lightly. Like, it's not just an option. It's not just something for giggles. Like, you're in this, and you were chosen by God to be a sponsor for this candidate, right? And so I walked through these 3 C's of being a sponsor, and the first one is communication. So the tip in being a good sponsor is to communicate really, really well, and part of that communication is with God, right? Because it's really, you have to have God's power, right, in order to be a good sponsor. And so communication with God is key. So you have to do that in prayer as well as the sacraments. You have to be open to God's grace, right? Receiving Holy Communion, going to confession, attending, holy days of obligation, all of these things, right? You have to be in good standing with the church, and you have to be communicating with God. And the next part really is that you're communicating with your candidate, and this is where I say, anything goes. Like, communicate with your candidate as much as possible. Communicate with how they communicate, whether it's texting or Snapchat or whatever it is. Communicate with them. It's essential. The next C is consistency, and I say this as in all things in life, right? To succeed, you've got to show up, right? You have to show up in order to succeed. You have to be there, right? So sponsors, if they want to be good sponsors, have to continuously show up, consistently show up and check in with their candidates. They have to call them, communicate with them. They have to, plan things with them. They have to be intentional about what it means to be a sponsor. Because if you're not going to be a very good sponsor, right? So the sponsors who do this well are amazing sponsors, and they do great work, right? So it's important to remember that. So, and the last one is coach, and this is kind of a little bit more heady, and maybe I'm thinking from a sports mentality, but a coach, right, is somebody who is a mentor, who guides a person in how to do something well. And typically, a coach is somebody who knows how to do that thing very well. So hopefully, you if you've been picked as a sponsor, you've been picked for a reason. So God knows you have something to communicate, and if you feel like you're lacking in one way or another, learn it. Study the church, practice your faith better, stronger. Do whatever you can to be a good coach for your candidate. Doesn't mean that you need to be perfect. Sometimes the best coaches are really good at explaining their own flaws, and so that their players, their apprentices, right, their learners, can grasp onto something that maybe the coach struggles with, right? That they can get past that. So your guidance should be focused on bringing the teens closer to Jesus, right? Like the goal of a coach in, like, let's say soccer practice isn't right. It isn't so that the coach looks really cool, right? It's so that the success of the team is bettered, right? That the coach's aim is to help the player be the best player that they can be, right? And that they keep their eyes on the prize, right? Which is, in the case of soccer, winning games, right? And also playing fairly, right? And whatnot. Um, so in this case, in the case of the church, in the case of confirmation, the eye on the prize is Christ, right? You have to keep the main thing the main thing. A really good friend of mine says that. You have to keep the main thing the main thing, and the main thing is Jesus, right? If you can't keep the main thing the main thing, then you have no business being involved, right? So you need to be a coach, okay? You have to be an example. And I kind of jumped through some of these things, but we're going to jump over here to what is a threshold? Okay, so I took a lot of this stuff for this book from this really awesome book called Forming Intentional Disciples by this really amazing author named Sherry Weddell. And it's actually a really well-known book in the church right now. And it's actually known outside the church. It's not even, I mean, it is a Catholic book, but Protestants use it as well. It's just really awesome. And in here she talks about thresholds of conversion. So wherever we are in our faith, whether we think we're a super strong practicing Catholic, or if we we might not be fully believing everything, but we attend Mass all the time, to we don't never attend Mass, we actually usually go to Eagle Brook down the road or whatever. No matter where you are with this stuff, obviously you have another step to go, right? We all have places to grow in our faith, even our priests, right? They're all learning and growing closer to God. They're also reaching new thresholds of conversion every day. And this is about more of the initial conversion, right? I've been working with confirmation candidates and really just like high school and middle school teens for almost 10 years. And the one thing that I can say is, regardless of this upbringing that they have, whether they have a super Catholic family, or they were homeschooled, they went to Catholic school, or they were public school like me their entire life, no matter what the situation for their youth, right, where they're learning, all of them need conversion. They desperately need conversion. It's something that they actually hunger for. They hunger for purpose, right? And even the ones who become converted, right, who find Christ and become converted, are not done. They still need more. They need more conversion because there's more in their life that they need to grow in. Okay, so this is important because conversion is essential to what we're doing here in confirmation. We want our candidates at their confirmation to walk down the aisle towards the bishop knowing and believing and loving Jesus. And that's a tall order. And we don't have to get all of those things perfect, but we do need to try. So the thresholds of conversion are trust, curiosity, openness, seeking, and discipleship. So trust, right? That they simply actually just trust you as a person who's leading them. It's not necessarily even trusting God yet, right? Like if you were a door-to-door salesman, right, and you wanted somebody to buy your crazy vacuum that costs $1 zillion, the first thing you have to do is establish some trust with them, because the person doesn't know you from anybody, right? So you're just walking into their door and saying, hey, buy this vacuum, and most people will be like, no, get out of my house. But if you show up and you talk to them and like really try to level with them, right? And so some door-to-door salesmen are a little sketchy about this, and they can be a little pushy. But most of them know that they have to establish rapport early, right? So they ask you questions about your house, your day-to-day life. They level with you. They try to relate with you on the things that you struggle with. Right? So they build trust with you. And same thing with like commercials. That's why every commercial that you ever watch begins with a scene of some person, right, like doing something that you might find yourself doing. The commercial is trying to establish trust with you. So you watch that commercial and you go, I've done that before. I think I'm going to believe what they say, right? So the same thing with being a sponsor. You have to establish trust. Now, hopefully, that trust leads into curiosity, right? This is the same kind of thing as the door-to-door salesman, right? They've built the trust with you. They have a friendly face. They seem like the kind of person that you might ordinarily trust, and maybe you're just feeling kind of generous today. So, that door-to-door salesman, he points out. He's like, wow, it seems just like you're really overworked. So maybe I have this thing that would be really great for you to see. It might help you with your day, right? And make your life a little bit easier. And so then you become curious. You're like, like this guy's really nice. He's talking about things that might help me out. Like maybe I should learn more about this, right? And you become curious. You want to know why they're there. What are they selling? Same thing with the commercial, right? Even if they're selling you the newest, latest energy drink or whatever it is, right? Even if you probably know that you don't usually like energy drinks, you can probably relate to the fact that you're probably tired a lot, as most of us work really hard, and you're curious to know if that drink or whatever might actually be something that is not only healthy for you, but it can help you stay awake or something like that. Right, so you develop curiosity, and the next part is openness, right? And so in this case, again, with a sponsor, right, you build trust. Hopefully the trust leads into curiosity. The candidate wants to know, why are you a sponsor, and why do you believe this stuff that the church says? Because I think it's crazy, or I think it's fine, but I'm not really that interested in it. Or I'm really interested in it, but I don't really understand how it affects my life, right? Like, so all of these different things, hopefully that trust leads into curiosity, and they want to know more about why you think of these things, right? And maybe why the church says them too. The third one is openness, right? So hopefully they've built trust, they've built their curiosity with you, they're interested in what you have to say, and they become open to how what you say might affect changes in their life. They might say, you know what? Yeah, I'm willing to fork over $400 for a new vacuum, right? Or, yeah, I think I could, maybe go out and get that energy drink. It's not that much money. It's only $14 or something like that, right? They become open. And the same thing with a candidate in conversion. They might say, yeah, I don't really understand it and know how to do it, but I want the joy that Christ can bring. If that's what he can truly bring, I'm open to that. That'd be really good, right? The next one is seeking, right? Is seeking Jesus, right? Getting to the heart of the matter, right? At that point, you're recognizing, okay, I'm going to go and I'm going to get that thing. I'm going to explore more and see where my heart truly lies with this. So you're not just open, you're not just curious, and you're not just trusting, but you're also willing to take the next step. And the last part is discipleship, right? And so that's where you have all these things. You built trust, you're curious about the faith, you're open to how it might make changes in your life, you've sought Jesus, and now you're with him and trying to follow him. But you might fail, right? But you still get up again and keep trying. Right? So these are all these things, these thresholds of conversion, and these are the things that we're trying to build with you, your sponsor, and your catechist or candidate, as well as at confirmation as well. This is exactly what we're trying to do all the time. That's why we play games, we do goofy things, and we try to bring in speakers that are not just good teachers, but in fact are engaging, are interesting, that they can build trust, and they can help the teens to become curious and perhaps open to conversion in their heart. So check that out. And I have some of these tips here too. So let's jump over to threshold conversations. So we went from conversions and now we're in conversations. I know they're similar words, but they're still different. So these conversations are things that we're asking our sponsors to do with our candidates. So threshold conversations, I have 3 of them during confirmation, and I have given them like nifty Latin names, okay? So Liber, Lanua, and Fortis. Okay, and I'll explain kind of what those mean. But every conversation should occur after an encounter with Christ. And that's really important, right? So whether that encounter is going to mass, going to daily mass, going to adoration, going to confession, or going to serve the poor or whatever, all of those things, you're encountering Christ. You're encountering Christ in the poor. Christ spent a lot of time with poor. Of course, you're going to see him and find him in the poor. Right? You're encountering Christ in Mass, the Eucharist, absolutely. You're encountering him in adoration because he's right there in front of you and you're adoring him, right? All of those different things are encounters. And so that's when we should have conversations, and they should occur after the encounter, right? You should also, as a sponsor, be honest and open. We want to share what our true feelings are, right? Where we really are. The biggest thing there is to not display a closed off mentality to the church and to the teaching. If you're struggling with something in your faith, it's actually okay to talk about that, but what's not okay is to display like a closed offness to the church, right? You're a sponsor for confirmation in the Catholic Church. You need to be open to your candidate, but you also need to be open yourself to the church and to Christ. And so, if you don't really like a particular teaching in this way or in this particular thing, you should hopefully be open to the truth of it, right? Whether you agree with it or not. That's really, really important, because if you say, I like these things about the church, but I don't really like this, well, then what you're actually saying to the candidate is, just take what you want from this and then go find the rest elsewhere. And that's not really healthy for anybody. I mean, you should never do that. Like, the faith and religion and eternity is not a matter of a salad bar, right? You shouldn't take your ranch from here and your whatever there. Like, there's good food and then there's garbage, and that's kind of the question, right? So we need to remember that. So we need to be relaxed and not forced. So really just trying to be calm and to be and to not be nervous, right? To be just willing to talk, right? And to not like force out a conversation or force things that the candidates aren't ready for, right? So just be relaxed with them. Do something that they want to do. Put them at ease, right? I skipped this one, but begin and end in prayer. You always want to begin and end in prayer. In everything. When we do that, we invite God to be present. Okay? The last thing is that you should have a plan and be intentional. Number one thing with sponsors is they have it, like all of us, I think this is true for everybody, we have a tendency to say that we want to do something, but we never make a plan to do it. So we're like, I really want to lose 15 pounds. So I'm just going to kind of try to do that. Well, if you don't make a plan or try to exercise or try to cut down on snacky foods or whatever, and you like make a very specific plan for that, then you might be successful. But if you say from now to now I'm going to try to lose 15 pounds, well, that's going to be really hard, right? You have to have a plan. It's the same thing with being a sponsor. If you don't have a plan, you're not going to be successful. So you need to make a plan. We're going to meet at this time, at this date, at this place, and we're going to meet from this time to this time, and that'll be it. Because if we don't do that, then nothing happens, right? We can buzz through all the questions in these conversations in about 2 minutes and call it a night. And that's not really successful. That's not the intention of them. So I'll show you the conversations. Let's jump to conversation 1, liber, which is Latin for free. Okay, so it's the first conversation. It's really just about gaining that openness and trust and communication, right? So I give you about 5 to 6 questions for every one of these conversations, but here's the deal. They're not exhaustive. It's a conversation, not a Q&A, right? So you're not just blabbing out questions and expecting the candidate to answer them. You're using these questions as a guide to build a conversation around, right? They're just conversation starters. You should have other questions, other thoughts, other ideas for which you can engage with the candidate, okay? So I provide some do's and don'ts here. So do something fun. Don't fake it, right? Fake that you're having fun. They can tell if you are, right? Do something that you both enjoy, hopefully. Do treat them fairly and honestly, right? So you want to be friends, or I'm sorry, you want to be friendly, but not friends necessarily, right? You're maybe you can call it friends, but you're not on an equal friendship level, right? You, as a sponsor, have authority over the candidate. You do. You have an authority over the candidate in which to say, to look at their actions and say, hey, I think that's good for you, and I think that is not good for you. And if you don't take the time to delineate that, to make sure that they understand that you have an authority as their sponsor to give them suggestions as to how to live their life, then they're not going to really trust anything that you say, right? Because they see you as an equal. And I don't know if you've been around teens and their friends very often, but by and large, most of them are only really concerned about themselves and not what other people, tell them to do, right? Sometimes they can be very self-conscious, but that doesn't mean that they're going to be open with you, right? If they feel that you're judgmental, that could be difficult. So that's where the friendliness comes in, right? You want to level with them about what you expect from them, but not to do it condescendingly. You don't want to come down as a top-down individual saying, do this, do that. But you need to tell them what your expectations are, but trust that they can live up to them. Sometimes even just having a little bit of trust in a young person can go a long way. Even if that deep down, they're not ready for that trust yet. But if you look at them and say, I trust you, I know you can do this, sometimes that's all it takes for them to be successful. If you put a lot of stipulations around, trying to control how they do things and when they can do things, then sometimes they never try to rise to the occasion. They just try to fit within what you want, and then they occasionally slip out of one thing or another. Okay? And that's kind of part of the last thing here. Don't be a parent. Okay? Be clear with your candidate. Be clear with them, right? Without talking down to them. And don't try to be something that you're not, right? You're not a parent as a sponsor. You're not a parent. Your job isn't to make sure that they clean behind their ears, right? Your job is to make sure that they are trying to grow in their faith life. Arguably a bigger job, right? So like that it's just a different role. It's a mentorship role. So you're not their parent. Parents have a huge and very, very important responsibility elsewhere, but this is a different role than that. So these questions you can see here, they're a lot more about building trust and getting to know one another. Jump down here. All right. Conversation 2, lanua, which is Latin for door, right? So this is kind of the opening of that door. So it's a conversation involving a turning point in your relationship. Hopefully you're stepping over the threshold, right? Hopefully you and the candidate have a trusting relationship as this conversation is essential, right? So in this conversation, what we're trying to do is understand where they are in their faith and what they believe or don't believe about God, right? So the first question, right, it gets right down to it. So describe your relationship with God right now. And so this is a question both for the candidate and for you, and it's not just a simple, like, yes, I believe in him. That's not a relationship. I can believe that, I can believe that Chevy Chase exists, right? He's a funny actor, but I don't have a relationship with him, right? So, so you want to describe your relationship with God, right? So and then also to talk about what's hard about describing it, right? So this is actually the last question from last week, but it's good because we want to kind of establish this question again and begin to answer some of the parts of it. So the next thing are some suggestions of what to talk about depending on what they say. And maybe they don't say any of these things, in which case you're on your own and you got to kind of fend for yourself there. But these are some suggestions that I give you in order to try and understand where the candidate is coming from and ask them deeper questions about what they truly believe. So the first question is, or the first thing is, if they say, I don't believe in God, then what you can say is, tell me about the God that you don't believe in, right? Have them describe what they don't believe about God. Because the truth is, they actually, most likely, are actually describing a God that's not a God we believe in either, right? A lot of teens and actually a lot of adults and people can have this tendency in atheism to not actually, when they're describing what they don't believe, they actually are describing things that aren't true about God anyways, right? So there's some fallacy there, and you can begin to build some openness. If they say, I don't know if there's a God, which is kind of this more agnostic question, right? which is actually often where a lot of our young people are, right? They'd rather be kind of apathetic and say, I don't really know, and I don't really want to know, right? So then the question is, have you ever been sure, right? So, like, have they ever had a time in their life when they've been sure? And then if they did have a time like that, the question is, like, if you did know for sure, what would you know, right? So, like, if you ask them, all right, so just pretend for a second that you did know. Um, or yeah, what would you do, right? So if you did know for sure, what would you do? So ask them, like, if they believed for sure, what would they actually do about that? How would it affect their life? Because I think the question that it gets down to there is, what like what does it actually cost them to believe in something, right? If they could say, I do believe that there is a God, what does it cost them? And then what are the consequences of that, right? How would they live differently? So kind of builds that question into a larger conversation. So then if they say, I don't have a personal relationship with God, right? So they might say that I go to church or whatever. And I think this is a question that you need to draw out of them, or a statement that you need to draw out of them. Because I think this is probably the answer for the majority of our kids in confirmation. Most of them will probably say that they believe in God and they go to Mass. But they don't actually have a personal relationship with Him. They might say that they do. They might say, yeah, I pray. And then but then you need to ask them, like, well, how much do they really pray, right? What do you pray? Like, usually, I hear this all the time. I pray when I have a hard test. I sometimes pray before dinner, and sometimes I pray before bed, but it's usually really short. Well, what do you do to pray? Well, usually it's just like they just talk, right? Which isn't bad. Or they pray a Hail Mary or an Our Father, right? It's not really anything more than that, right? So the question then is, do they really have a relationship? And if they say that, if they admit that they don't actually have a personal relationship with God, then you start to begin these, like, bigger questions, right? Do you pray at all? This is important, right? Yeah, I think you can get them to acknowledge that if they don't have a personal relationship with somebody, right? If they wanted to have a relationship with someone in their life, they'd probably actually have to talk to them, right? Tell them about their day. And conversation with God is really good. Talking to God like a friend is good. It's a great place to start. Sometimes that can be hard, so just praying anything is really good. Praying a rosary is really good. The Divine Mercy Chapel is really short. Just spending time in adoration. You have to spend time with God in order to get to know Him and to have a relationship with Him. And then to start talking about really spiritual people, because if you start talking about really spiritual people, they can begin to recognize how these people lead very different lives than themselves, but yet have greater happiness. And the question comes down to, how much of their life is spent in relationship with God? Well, all of it, right? They spend every moment of their life praying, and it's not just kind of like this general statement, I pray at all times. No, they actually really pray all the time. They're praying rosaries constantly, going to adoration 4 times a day, right? So, how is that different, and how can it affect you? And the next thing is, if they say, I do believe in God and I have a personal relationship with Him, and then the question becomes, how do you nourish your relationship, right? Because the thing is, you can say, I pray with God, I talk to God all the time, I have a great personal relationship with God, but I've heard that a lot of people say that, but then I ask them, well, okay, well, where do you go to church? And they say, well, I'm Catholic, but I sometimes go to this other Protestant church sometimes because it feels good, and I meet people there and whatnot. Well, so how else do you do that? Well, I read the Bible occasionally, and I just sometimes I like to go to adoration, but I don't really go to Mass. So all those things, and then this question becomes, well, you're not actually really nourishing your relationship. You're not being fed by the divine food, right? So it's a big question. And if they can acknowledge that, then okay, they need to actually grow deeper in their faith. They need to nourish their faith better. So, the last conversation is fortis, which is Latin for strong. It occurs right before actual confirmation. and it's important to envelop this time with prayer as much as possible, right? So you just really want to pray in this question, or in this conversation. And one of the things I suggest here is that sponsors go to confession before confirmation as well. Everyone should be steeped in God's grace before going to confirmation. And the candidates will go during confirmation itself. So, also don't push unwilling candidates into the sacrament. Sacraments must be freely chosen and freely received. And the last is pray and fast for your candidate. So like actually fast, like, if you're able to, try not to eat any desserts. Give up a meal multiple times. Just offer that sacrifice back up to God, right? In hope for your candidate. So these questions kind of get more at this. And the last thing is to make a 1, 3, and 5-year plan for continued growth and discipleship post-confirmation. It's essential that you do this. Again, getting back to that thing, if you don't make a plan, nothing will happen. Number one issue post-confirmation, candidates, sponsors, and parents don't make a plan for faith. They just say, well, great, we did it. All right, go be Catholic. Yay. Nothing happens because they don't make a plan. They just kind of hope. And hope is good, but it's not going to help if you don't use your intellect and you don't try. So you have to be smart about it. So that is all of session 7. Everything we talked about. This confirmation in session 8, I will not be attending, sadly. I wish that I could. I just can't make it work. It's just not going to be possible with my mental state right now. So I'll be praying for you guys. Please pray for me. And I'm going to make a video here just for our confirmation candidates during the session. And I hope everything is well. I will see all of you very soon. Thank you.